A young man arrived at the Apollo Theater wanting to appear on Amateur Night. He literally didn't have any clothes to wear on stage. So a bunch of the folks lent him a shirt, a pair of pants, and Sandman Sims himself lent him a pair of shoes. Needless to say, he won Amateur Night, stood the place on its ear, and soon became a super attraction all over the world, and a spokesman for black pride and equal opportunities for blacks in all walks of life. What a treat to welcome back to the Apollo Theater the hardest working man in show business, the godfather of soul, Mr. James Brown.
You simply did not tell Mr. Brown what to do. You simply did not. The Reverend Al Sharpton, who Mr. Brown unofficially adopted, stuck with him for about 35 years. When disco chased him off and his popularity slipped, his great band departed, Sharpton stayed. He watched Brown fall from superstar playing Madison Square Garden to an oldies act for $5,000 per night, working without a record deal with the new band, the Soul Generals, playing his old hits at high speeds with background dancers dressed in red, white, and blue, pirouetting across the stage like pom-pom girls at a Dallas Cowboys football game. Promoters abandoned him. The IRS cleaned him out. He lost his private plane, his radio stations, the women he had used and in some cases abused. Terribly began to fight back with lawsuits. His drug problems, which he had always hidden from the Rev, led him to jail. Yet the Rev stayed, traveling by car 2 or 3 times a month from New York to South Carolina to see Mr. Brown, drumming up public support to get him out of jail. Sharpton loved Mr. Brown, not only as a father, but as a man who could stand up and take it and not knuckle or beg. James lost his juice, really. He spent his entire career compartmentalizing everyone. Band members here, payoff guy here, women there, white managers there, black managers there, black friends here, white friends here, wives, girlfriends. It all collapsed around him. And when he looked up one day, most of them were gone.
It resulted, as a matter of fact, in Brown assaulting his wife with a lead pipe and firing a gun at a car that she was in. These are charges that Brown denies. He was released yesterday on $15,000 bond. He joins us from Atlanta to discuss the charges, and we welcome you, James Brown. How did all of this trouble begin?
Living in America. There's nothing wrong.
Nothing wrong at all. You're not in any difficulty, but you're out on bond.
No, I'm not.
The only ones left were the old-timers, Charles Bobbitt, Leon Austin, and of course, the Rev. There are probably 200 musicians who went through James Brown Band or played on one of his records over the course of his 51-year career. Of that number, probably 10 contributed key components to his sound. None were more important, lesser known, and less credited than trombonist Fred Wesley and the man he leaned from, Pee Wee Ellis. The fact is James Brown Band, from 65 to 69, fronted by Pee Wee, I would argue is the greatest group of rhythm and blues musicians ever assembled. You see, in the 60s, Brown heard something different. He was hearing a downbeat that expanded into Brown's mind to be a big hit on the one beat of every other bar. He heard a new groove, and he needed the best players he could find to translate that groove into hits. But it wasn't easy. For one thing, any band is hard to handle, and Brown's band was not just any band. The players would eventually fill out Brown's outfit from roughly 64 to 69 and would set the tone for American popular music for decades to come. The band was big, made up of male and female players, mostly from the South. Brown's behavior toward his musicians is one of the saddest legacies. In 2 years of gathering data, I found that the answers were pretty much the same. He didn't pay enough. He was mean, he was outright cruel. He fined musicians for small infractions on stage. Missing a cue, shoes not shined, missing a tie, he was divisive. He slept with his female singers, and he was a master of manipulation. He ran senseless, endless, punishing rehearsals for hours, sometimes right after the gig, sometimes till daylight for no reason other than to show who was boss. The band traveled by bus and Brown traveled by private plane, and his temper was frightening. And seemingly anything could touch him off. He once slapped a guy, pulled a gun on another guy. In short, Brown dehumanized the band. Most of them, while respecting his musicality and showmanship, disliked him intensely.
What is a genius? One whose inspiration demands change. A genius, I love you more. I couldn't refuse to give this award tonight because nobody has influenced me more than this man right here.
As early as 1987, James Brown began to think about his death. He would formalize his will and trust 13 years later. By then, his life had unraveled. His second marriage to Dee Dee Jenkins had ended in divorce. His father, whom he held dear, had died. His third wife, Adrienne, was lifted into God's kingdom tragically 2 years later after liposuction surgery in California, crushing a blow for Brown. His fourth marriage in December 2001, union to Tommy Ray, a backup singer he met in Las Vegas, would unravel in a marital disaster that will spill into the court for years after his 2006 death. He was 68 when they married, and she was 32. She bore him a son, James Jr., and that same year had not divorced her first husband. And when Brown found out, it broke his heart. Brown's children, 6 claimed, 1 adopted, and at least 4 others unclaimed, were a mismatch of grace, tragedy, or greed, or depending on whom you asked. They had to make appointments to see him. By 1998, had become an increasingly isolated old man. Behind the bluff and the ranting and the rages and the hollering and shouting was a man who was so torn by conflict that he snuck off to smoke a cigarette so that no one would see him. He was a man who rarely drank or cursed or let down his guard in public, which meant in front of people, in front of everyone, period, an incredibly lonely, overwrought, and sensitive man. A man who lived alone inside of himself. But in this instant information age, every truth contradicts another truth. Brown was crazy. Brown was a genius. Brown was a woman basher. Brown was abused by gold-digging women. Brown was cheap. Brown would give away his last dime. Stick your finger in the dike to cover the one lie, and a water bursts out of another hole. You have to choose what to believe, and therein lies the real story of James Brown, who was more Southerner than he was black or white, more sensitive artist than he was a superstar. In the wee hours of Christmas Day 2006 at Emory Crawford Lung Hospital in Georgia, James Brown passed away. His knees, his prostate, his heart, his teeth, his lungs were all giving out, and his close friend and manager surrounding him. At his funeral, his body went on tour, ending up at the Apollo. Mr. Brown, my friend, you did it again. You sold out the Apollo one last time.
I thank God that I have had a chance to be what I've been. And here I am being able to turn around the music like Mozart, Schubert, Beethoven, Bach, and now you say Brown. It could have been Brahms or somebody else.